Apologies, I missed the first couple of minutes of videoing this drawing. One thing I will draw attention to is you can see a number of dotted lines outlining various shapes around the piece of paper, and that's to approximately represent where the clumps of flowers are, and that's to help me draw them in the scale that I want to draw them in, and also to position them where I want them positioned so that I can then generally add the leaves between. Now there are some leaves I will be drawing as I draw the clumps because they're key leaves and they visually cross the paths in some way of the flowers, but generally I'm going to draw the flower clumps first and then the leaves second. Now when we're trying to capture the effect of detail, which is what we're doing here, there's way too much detail to try and draw these things exactly, these flowers. So I want to look at the shape of each flower, which is basically a trumpet lily type shape, but clustered together, and work out how can I get the feel of that without having to draw all these little trumpet clusters. And it's by paying particular attention to the edges, because these edges of these flowers stand out really clearly, both because of their colour, but also because of the shadow that's deeper further behind, creating a darker value. And so the edges need to represent the effect we get when we get a group of petals coming up from a fairly narrow cone shape and then splaying outward into this trumpet shape, but also massed together. So the petals of the flowers that are on the outer edges of our clusters, they're the ones that I really want to make sure capture the feel, the bend, the turning, the relationship with each other, because the eye is going to see them as a light silhouette against a darker background really quickly. And so it will be using that information, that visual information, to tell us what we're looking at. And then the parts that we haven't drawn so clearly or so exactly, the brain will see what is in the photo rather than what's in our drawing, even when it's looking at our drawing. It will fill in the gaps, so to speak. So I need to, in a sense, draw enough clues. Now, you're watching this at 2 1/4 time. So this is times 1 1/4, my drawing speed. So if you want to see me do this drawing just to see some of the marks more closely, you can use that cog icon to slow this down. When I do the hatching at the end to introduce the value, I speed that up to 1.5 times. This drawing in real time took me just under 45 minutes to do, which was a bit longer than the drawings I usually do for YouTube videos, but it's still, I think, a very reasonable time for even a small drawing. Now, I'm also trying to capture the effect of the leaves. Some of the leaves I'm drawing carefully because I really do want to capture the reference. I like this composition, I chose it carefully, and so I want to capture the key moments visually of the composition, and that includes these wonderful dark green strappy leaves. However, once I've established the key ones and some of the ones that sit a bit further back in the shadows, I don't intend to be overly meticulous with following the reference. I'll start to create the effect of what we see without taking the time to draw it so exactly. Now, I'll post on my community page, as well as this reference photo, I'll post this line drawing. I did stop the camera and take a photo of it before I began the hatching. So if you'd like to have a go at working on your hatching, then you can use this line drawing stage to do that. You can screenshot, print off a copy, and just start with the hatching and see how that goes. Learning to draw the effect of detail, I find essential for my drawing, and I think it's key to capturing a sense of realism. It's ironic that when we learn to draw less detail, our drawings look more realistic. But it comes from the principle that when we look at something, our brain doesn't actually see all the detail all at once. It focuses on a part, and then the brain has, from previous experience usually, learnt to make jumps and to connect the dots without seeing between all the dots. The problem is our reference photo, our photograph, does capture all the dots. And when we're looking at it to draw, we look over it bit by bit and we see all the detail and feel the need to draw all the detail. And even if we draw well, the effect therefore is hyper real. It's more than real, because in reality we don't see it all. So my technique of drawing the effect of the detail in some ways I think captures the visual effect that we have in real life. And so it does introduce a sense of realism. Now, with this, I don't want this to be, in effect, a pattern. I want this to be a drawing. Photographs do flatten what they take. We lose the sense of depth of 3 dimensions. So in my finished drawing, I want the sense that these lower flowers are closer. And as we move up the picture, the depth moves further back. And so even at this stage, I've tried to do the line work for the upper half a bit lighter, a bit looser, a bit less detailed, so that it helps create the effect of sitting further back. And when I do the hatching, that's going to really become noticeable, I think. So again, sorry, I missed the first few moments of the hatching. So now we've sped up to 1.5 times. But what I'm particularly wanting to do at this point is to do all the darknesses around the clumps of flowers, around the edges of all the petals. And I'm basically just colouring that in just to a couple of millimetres of depth, because I need that to be really sharp and really crisp, so that when we glance at this scene, at these flowers, we can get as much information to read what flowers we're looking at. Now, I also want to make sure that some of these strappy leaves are really clear to see as well. But at this point, it's making sure I define my bunches of flowers. But I am also working harder to define the overall bunch of flowers rather than particular flowers in these bunches, because we tend to see them as a bunch, not as individuals. What I usually do in the closest bunch is I draw a few in more detail, ones that are actually visually more prominent, either because of the lighting or because of the angle we're seeing them from. Now, there are also some stamens that come out from the center of these, and exactly how we see them depends on the angle of the trumpet that we're looking at. But you'll see me, I probably have already, or I'm about to do some basically little dots and short lines in the throat of these flowers to try and represent the stamens. But I don't start drawing little bars on stalks that go down into the center of the flower. That would be too much detail and would start to look a bit out of place with the more gestural feel I'm trying to introduce with the rest of this. Now, you'll see what I'm doing. I'm doing the darker sections first, and then with these strappy leaves, I'm doing some very rough hatching on the parts that are deepest in. And I am referencing my picture to see exactly what the shade and shadow is, because I do overall want my values to represent something of what I'm seeing in the reference. If this is interesting, please hit the like button for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And just a little interesting note for you, I actually began to do a video on this drawing, I don't know, maybe a year ago. And well, it's one of the very few drawings I've begun for a video where I was so unhappy with it, I didn't make the video. And so I feel, whereas I was very happy with this drawing, and it's very satisfying because I feel like I have improved. I'm not just a teacher, of art, but I'm a student of art as well, and I'm still learning and developing my drawing style, and I pay attention to what I say, and I consciously put it into practice, and I find it certainly helps my drawing. I hope it helps yours as well. So I was very encouraged that on my second go, after maybe about 12 months of working on the sorts of skills of observation and of mark making and of understanding the drawing process and of drawing the effective detail, that I was able to come up with a more, if you like, satisfactory solution to the challenge, to the problem of translating a photograph into some sort of capture of the visual effect using a line. And this line is a 0.2 millimeter pen. So it's a relatively fine pen for the amount of hatching I'm going to do, but it's not a large drawing. And I'm able to do most of this hatching actually very quickly. You'll see partly what I'm doing is I hatch individual, I block in some of the deeper shadows, basically as block color. And then I hatch the darker section of individual leaves. But I'll then also hatch over all of that with some large hatching. And that makes that whole section darker, but it keeps the relative difference between the different parts and their values the same relative darkness. I just have to be careful, though, that I don't do that over highlights that I've deliberately left. And now I'm moving up, and I'm trying to consciously now not go as dark with my hatching up here, because I do want this to sit back. However, I'm also aware that lower down, I will be darkening the dark values further. And this is why in a scene such as this, a scene where there's a fair bit of hatching over the whole scene, it's good not to try and do the final hatching value, not to create the final darkness as you go around the different parts, but to be bringing the entire scene to the level of value that you want to have at the end. So at the moment, we're starting to see the values appearing all over. It's looking a bit bitsy at this point because I'm working on the darkest areas, and there's going to be large lines of hatching that will darken large areas at once and soften some of the visual edges between the different values that we have at the moment. And so the speed picks up, but despite the speed, I have to make sure that I am still referring to my reference so that I stay in touch with the consistent light source and remind myself of particularly of the white paper that I want to preserve. I mean, it is hard to know when to stop with the hatching. But what I want to do also is use the hatching not just for the value, but to represent the colour in some ways as well. If we have this photo on our camera or computer, we can take the colour out and just see the difference of value between the orange and the various shades of green that we have. And in the upper part, the orange is not going to be as different on grayscale as some of the greens. But in my black and white drawing with my hatch lines, I am going to, in effect, make the lighter greens that are higher up a bit darker than they would otherwise be in relation to the orange, because I want the orange to stand out clearly, albeit not as clearly as down below in the lower clumps. So I'm just going, and then stop for a moment and check with the reference. But I also just look to see, are the values dark enough? Do I need to go darker? And before I start that, I do check, are there parts I need to preserve? Now I'm looking at where I've got, if you like, gaps in my hatching, because the hatching I've done this part, that part, as I've moved around the very darkest spots. But sometimes that's meant I haven't actually taken the edges of where I've hatched to the edges of the other parts that I've hatched. And so there are kind of corridors between them. So I'm linking up the corridors now, if any of that makes sense to you. And please, if you haven't hit the like button, why not do that for me? I hope you have a go drawing this. It's not straightforward in some ways, but because of all the detail, that can make it a bit more forgiving as well. What do you think of my claviers? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting. I hope you're encouraged to have a go. You don't have to draw the whole thing. Why not just draw that lower right-hand clump with some of the leaves around it as a way of testing the technique and getting warmed up in doing it. But look, in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.